Hi! In this video I will explore the world of AJAX and show you 6 different methods how to implement it. Welcome, my name is Andreas Judd, your tech-curious web designer. I am passionate about the front end, the back end and all that jazz. So AJAX is part of any modern website and lets you get data from the database without refreshing the page. So a typical example would be clicking a like button. I hope by the end of this video you have a better understanding of AJAX and learned how to add it to your website. Without further ado, let's dive in.
So what is AJAX? So AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Simply put, it lets you add new content to the site without refreshing the entire page. Asynchronous just means it does things independently from the other processes on the page. For example, it requests some data from the server, and while waiting, users can still use the page. The page doesn't hang up. JavaScript is the language we are using for this feature, and XML is the data format. There are a couple of different data formats, but for web application, XML is mostly replaced with JSON. JSON is a smaller, simpler, and more readable data format. Here we can see the syntax of XML versus JSON. While XML is using a HTML-like structure with values inside tags, JSON syntax looks more like a Python dictionary or JavaScript object, respectively, and is mostly used when we are dealing with web applications. So how does the AJAX process work? Let's say on our website we have a like button. When we click this button, the request goes to the backend, and then the backend decides what to do with the request. It might ask the database for data. In our case, we ask the current value of likes. The backend then updates the data and saves it back to the database. Then the backend sends the updated data back to the browser in a JSON file. The JavaScript code on our page would then translate the data, or parse it how it's called, and then inject the updated items onto the website. So let's have a look now at the most common methods how this is achieved. These are just basic examples how it works at a fundamental level, and I ignore the error handling altogether. So a final code in a production might be more complex. So to make this work, we need a server. I will install a local server with Django for this. So let's create first the AJAX folder and drag and drop it into our Visual Studio Code. This is the code editor I'm using. In Visual Studio Code, we get our terminal, new terminal here. First we check if we have Python installed, so Python 3 -- version. So Python 3 is installed. Next we create a virtual environment, Python 3 module VNV, so that's the name of the virtual environment. It appears here. Then we activate it with source VNV bin activate. Now we install Django, pip install Django. Then we upgrade pip install upgrade pip. Then we start a project, Django admin start project. We name our main folder core and we install it in the current folder. So the dot means in this current folder. Then we run the server, python manage.py run server. We have not migrated yet to the database, but we do it later. Let's have a look at the browser if everything works fine. We go to this URL here. And our Django application is up and running. Next, we create a templates folder, templates, and register it in our settings file. So in our templates, dirs, directories, we write base dir slash templates. So our Django application now knows about this templates folder. So inside the template folder, we add a index.html. I prepared some HTML files on GitHub. So let's head over there. So it's github.com/ndjat/ajax. We grab the index file here. Let's click on this copy row contents. Head back, inject it here in the index.html file. Save it. So let's create our first application. Python manage.py start app AJAX methods. We add this app in our core settings.py under installed apps. AJAX methods. Then we go to the view, add our view function, and we just render out the index.html. Now we go also to the URL, add the path here. We also have to import the function from AJAX methods.views import homepage. And now let's run the server. Python manage.py run server. And we see our index page. These are the different AJAX methods we will look into. So we have vanilla. How vanilla JavaScript handles it. Fetch is a new method using a simpler and easier to use syntax. Then we have fetch await, is even a new method and improves on the readability of the code. Then we have Axios. Axios is an external JavaScript library, which is very similar to fetch, with some improved error handling and also other user-friendly features. Then we have jQuery. jQuery is another external JavaScript library and it's very popular because of its general purpose features. It has a very simple syntax, but the file is much heavier and it handles AJAX similar to vanilla. And last but not least, we have Htmx, which is also external JavaScript library. But the amazing thing about Htmx is you don't have to write any JavaScript code yourself. We will look into this at last. So let's come back to our code now and add a class, the like class in our database. So we go to models.py and add the class here. It's just an integer field. Save it. We register it in the admin.py file. We also have to import the like class. So let's make our migrations now. So in the terminal write python manage.py make migrations. Then also migrate, so python manage.py migrate. As we're here already, let's create a super user because we want to have access to the database. So python manage.py create super user, password, okay, now python manage.py run server. Let's go back to our website. So here we go to our admin panel, so /admin, and we log in with our newly created username. admin and password. And we can see here the likes table. Just add a like with a count of 0. Okay, now we created an object where we can get the numbers of likes from. So back in our code, I add a little functionality, so whenever I click the home button, my likes count go back to 0. So let's go to our views here, and I add this code. So we have to import the like class from our model. So here I grab the likes object. So I just want the first likes object, and I set the count to 0 and save it back to the database. So now that this is set up, let's look into our first AJAX method, vanilla AJAX. Let's first create the page. So in our index file, let's add the URL. We add the path in our urls.py file. This is a path which uses the template view class, so we have to add it as well. And now we create the page we will create this vanilla.html. So in our templates, let's add vanilla.html. And we can get the code again from the GitHub repository. So let's get it from vanilla here and grab the code. And add it to our vanilla.html. We go back to the browser. Click on vanilla, and this is the page. So in the first box here, we will just add likes to the counter. We will make that work in a second. And in a second, we put a city name in the input field. It will be displayed underneath here. So let's have a look at the vanilla.html code. So we have first the extends from the index.html, so it grabs all the code we have there. Our code here in the block content. Underneath you have a JavaScript block, so this JavaScript will be inserted at the just before the closing body tag. So in this JavaScript block here, we handle the like button. As we see here, vanilla AJAX is using this XML HTTP request method. We can call this .open method, which basically creates a connection to the database and is taking the URL, which we will provide. Then the .send method, which sends the data to the backend. So in our case here, we don't have any data to send because we don't have any user input. We just increase the like counter in the database by 1. The .onload method is basically waiting for a response from the server, and once we get a response, it will pass the JSON file and then inject the updated value to our page. So all what we have to do now to make this code work is to add the URL, which we insert here in the data-URL. We add this link. So in urls.py, we have to create now a path. So we catch here the request and we call a function that's JSON_data function. We have not created this function yet. We will create it in a second, but first we have to import it from the views.py file. Save. So in the views.py file, we add now this function. This function basically says if the request method is a get, we again grab the first object and bind it to a variable likes. Then we increase the counter by 1 and save it to the database. Afterwards, we send it back to the browser as a JSON response. we have to import the JSON response module as well. There we go. We send it back as likes and attach the likes count value to it. So this is the moment of truth. It should all work now. Let's head back to our browser, refresh the page, and the likes button should work now. And there we go. Nice.
Nice.
So the next one is the input a city. So this is using a user input field, and we send the data to the backend using the post method. Let's go back to our code. So we see here we're using the post method now. We send data now to the backend. This data is coming from the form data here. And the onload method again waits for the response and updates the page with the data received from the backend, and then also resets the form. All we have to do now to make this code work is to add again the link in this data-URL attribute here, save it, and then we head back to our views and insert the logic. So here we're using the post method. If the request.method is post, we grab the city and then just send it back to the browser in a JSON file. Here we basically just append the response to the city list ID, which we will have here. So we will create a list of cities we input. So now let's test if this is all working. We head back to the browser, refresh, and let's test it. London, there we go, great. Rome, and the city I'm staying at the moment, Taipei. Great, awesome. Now that we implemented all the functionality, we can go through the other methods much quicker. Let's head back to our code. We can close here all the tabs and go to our index.html. Here we add now all the links for fetch, fetch await, Axios, jQuery, and Htmx. We can close now the index.html. We don't need this file anymore. Let's go to our urls.py, and here we include now all the paths. All what those paths are doing is to create their individual pages. We save the file. So the next method is the fetch method. Let's create the fetch.html page. Go to our templates, add a new file, fetch.html. Again, we get the code from GitHub. So the fetch method is using the fetch keyword here and then attaches the .then methods to it, as we can see here. So the syntax is much shorter and much cleaner. So very similar, the post method is handled. Here in the fetch, we declare the post method here, and here we attach the data to a body element. We parse the JSON file here, and then we wait for the response and append the value to the page. So let's add again the URL to make it all work. And here, save it and test it out. We go to our fetch and let's try the likes. It works nicely. And input a city. New York, nice. LA, great. Now straight to the next one, the fetch await method. So back in our code, We can close the fetch.html page. In our URL, we see we need to create a fetch_await.html. Go to our templates, create this file. And let's have a look how fetch_await does the handling. We see here the keyword async, which defines an asynchronous function. And when we do that, we can use the await keyword, which states that it will wait for the fetch to come back from the server. But in the meantime, we can already assign it to a variable. For the post method, we just have to include the post method in here, and we have to attach the data to the body key. So the use of all those variables makes the code very readable and accessible. Again, to make this code work, we just hook it up with our JSON_data function on the backend using the URL. We add here our URL in the data-URL attribute, and also here, save the file and test the page. Fetch_await, and AJAX is working. We also test the input. Let's add a city, Tokyo, nice, and Bangkok. Great, this was fetch_await. The next one is Axios. So in our code, we can again close the fetch_await.html. In our path, we see we have to create the Axios.html file. Go to templates, add the file, and grab the code from GitHub. Paste. And let's have a look. We're using here again the fetch_await method with async keyword and await keyword, but we're using the Axios keyword as well instead of fetch. The rest of the code looks very similar to fetch_awaits, but you can also use the fetch method if you prefer that syntax. As I mentioned before, Axios is a third-party JavaScript library which adds some improved error handling and other user-friendly features. It is a very popular and widely used library amongst developers. Let's add now our URL again. Here and here. And let's head over to the browser to test it out. This works. And let's add a city. Dubai. Yeah, it works. Lisbon. Nice. This was Axios. The next method is jQuery. We can close the Axios.html. We need to create the jQuery.html file. Go to templates, add a new file. So what we can see here straight up, the jQuery syntax is quite different. It's very simplified, much fewer lines of code compared to fetch or fetch_await. It's using the $.ajax keyword here. And AJAX is very good at manipulating the HTML with minimal code, as we can see here. Also the post method, here we can see the code is much slimmer and very easy to read because it's using those dollar hooks to target the HTML element directly. Okay, let's hook it up with our backend. So insert the URL, save the file, and test it in the browser. Nice. And for cities, let's go with Hong Kong and Sydney. Nice. The last method I have here is Htmx, and Htmx is different because we don't have to write our own JavaScript code. Let's have a look. Let's close the jQuery HTML. and let's create the htmx.html. There we go. So what we can see here, no custom JavaScript. We have our library installed here. But other than that, we just insert some attributes now on the HTML directly. So if you look first at our get method here, we can get rid of the ID and the data URL attribute. And instead, we're using AJAX, which stands for Htmx. So AJAX hyphen get. So with this attribute, we connect with the backend, and we can see straight away here it's a get method. So let's insert here our URL, and this time we are dealing with HTML data. So from the backend we're receiving HTML data now, not more a JSON file. So we have to create also a different method on the backend for this one. So if you look at our graphic here, the response is not more JSON, but we have a HTML data response. And the response will hook up with our Htmx attributes on the site. So next we declare the AJAX target. So here we say what we would like to manipulate, and we would like to manipulate the element with the ID likes. So this one here. And the last attribute we add is the AJAX swap. And here we define how we would like to manipulate the element. And this is a inner HTML swap. So we would like to swap the inside of the HTML. There's also an outer HTML where you change the whole element, including a span tags, but in this case, just the inner HTML. Okay, that's it. Let's create now the URL to hook this one up. So in our URLs, we insert a new path, and this is the HTML-data path. This is the function it will call. We have not created this function yet. Let's import it first here, and let's create the method in the next step. So HTML underscore data. In our view, we can copy the JSON underscore data code and change it to HTML. And the only difference here is the return object is not a JSON file, but a HTTP response. And we send back not a dictionary, but just the HTML. So in this case, we just send back the likes count. So we also have to import the HTTP response module. So in here, there we go. And now the code should work. Let's test it out. Back to our browser, Htmx, and it works completely without writing any custom JavaScript at all.
Oh, magic.
Magic, isn't it? Now let's look into the input as city functionality. We again can copy the postcode. And here again we have, instead of a JSON response, a HTTP response, and we are sending back just the city. But let's send the data back with some HTML. So let's put our city value within div tags. So div and closing div. Now, because this is a string now, not more an object, we have to put it within hyphens. Like that. And in order for our page to understand that this is a variable, we can use the f string. So if you write here f and add here curly brackets, then the templates understand this is a variable, not a string, and replaces it with the value we sent through. So the F here stands for format. Alright, now this code is done. Now let's add our Htmx attributes. On the form we can get rid of the ID, method and data URL, and instead we add AJAX post equals to our newly created URL. Our AJAX target is the city list, which we have here. And we swap it in before end. That means it will swap in the data always as the last element. Another option would be after begin, which would add the data as the first element in the list. Let's save it and check it out. Refresh. And let's try Munich. Nice. It works, but we can see here the form is not resetting, so the text stays in the input field. Let's fix that. For the input field to reset, we could write some custom JavaScript now, or another option would be to use Hyperscript, which is an external JavaScript library, which can add behaviors after a request is done. So let's add some Hyperscript. To get the script, let's go to the website. There we go. Let's grab the script code here and include it here. And now on our form, we can add this code underscore, which stands for Hyperscript, equals on Htmx colon after request reset me. So the code is very close to how you would describe what you want to do. Refresh the page and add a city, Munich. And as you see, the form did reset. Let's try another one. Milan, which is the city I'm visiting next. And there we go. It worked. Great. So this wraps up the coding part. We went through 6 AJAX methods. I let you decide which one is your favorite and which one you would like to use in your project. But as a bit of fun, I created my own AJAX method tier list. Keep in mind, this is from a web designer perspective. I will be ranking this method in terms of easy to use and how much I personally struggled to get the code working. So let's start with vanilla JavaScript. So vanilla has to go in D tier. It took me quite a while to make the code working, and writing all those lines of JavaScript was not something I enjoyed. Next we have fetch. Fetch was much easier. It was also easier to read. However, I didn't like stringing together the .then methods very much, so I give it a B. The fetch await method was fairly easy to use and to implement. The async keyword is a bit strange to look at, however, I like the use of the variables and the structured syntax. I give it an A. Then Axios is very similar, I give it an A as well, just behind fetch await, because it requires to add an external library and it adds that little bit of extra complexity. Then we have jQuery. I like the easy to use syntax of jQuery. However, the heavy file size makes it not really worth it to use on its own, and you might have to rewrite the logic later on if you decide not to use jQuery at all. For that reason, I give it a C. And last but not least, Htmx. For me, Htmx is S tier. It is easy to use and completely gets rid of the custom JavaScript code. As a web designer, I'm used to code in HTML and I prefer the big time over the use of JSON and JavaScript. And Htmx is a lot of fun to use and it really feels like magic. Again, this is a very subjective tier list, but it's really hard to argue against it.
Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new. If you have any question or comment, please feel free to leave them down below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon to get notified when I upload new content. Also follow me on Twitter or Instagram at AJAX. If you want to also support me financially, I will be super grateful. I'm a stay-at-home dad of 2 little ones and every little helps. I set up a Patreon page at this link where you can become my Patreon, or you can also buy me a coffee at this link if you like. Thank you so much, I appreciate you. Thanks for stopping by. Until next time, stay curious. Ciao and tschüss.